I never imagined that my own daughter would leave me out in the cold. It never crossed my mind that the man she married would strip away my dignity when I was at my lowest, and that she would stand by and allow it. But what they didn't realize was that life still had one final move left for me. And when I made it, everything changed. What you're about to hear isn't just a story, it's a moment of reckoning. My name is Margaret. I'm 58, and until recently, I believed wholeheartedly in the idea of unconditional love, especially when it came to family. My entire life was built around my husband and our daughter, Amanda. Every meal I prepared, every holiday I organized, every penny I saved, it was all for them. When my husband lost his battle with cancer last year, it felt like the ground disappeared beneath me. But I kept telling myself that I still had Amanda, that she was still there. I ended up selling the home my husband and I had built from the ground up in Cedar Park, just outside Austin. The memories there were too heavy. Too many nights I'd wake expecting to hear his voice from the kitchen. Amanda and her husband Chad offered to let me stay with them for a while. At least Amanda did. Chad barely acknowledged me when I arrived. I tried to keep a low profile, staying mostly in the small room at the back of their house. I cooked, I cleaned, I ran errands. I wanted to be useful, to not get in the way. But Chad always made me feel like I didn't belong. There was a look in his eyes like I was a nuisance he couldn't shake off. It started subtly. He'd roll his eyes when I asked something. He'd change the channel while I was watching a show. Once, as he passed me in the hallway, I heard him mutter, "Freeloader." I tried to believe I'd imagined it, but deep down, I knew I hadn't. Amanda didn't say anything. I'd glance her way, hoping she'd step in or say a word, but she always brushed it off. "He's just under a lot of pressure," she'd say. "Work's been tough lately." I bit back the shame and kept quiet. That's what mothers are supposed to do, right? But one evening changed everything. I'd made chicken pot pie, Chad's favorite. Amanda was scrolling on her phone, Chad was drinking a beer, and the room felt weighed down by silence. Then, out of nowhere, Chad looked up and said, "Maybe we should stop pretending this is temporary. We're not running a charity." Amanda went still. I stared at him. "What are you talking about?" I asked. He gave a half smile. "I mean, how long is this going to go on? You're not working. You're not helping with expenses. We have bills to pay. We didn't plan on feeding another mouth." I felt my breath catch, my heart thundering. I turned to Amanda, silently pleading. She wouldn't even look at me. "Maybe it's better," she said quietly, "if you found something more stable, for everyone's sake." I didn't shout. I didn't argue. I got up, went to my room, and began packing. 2 suitcases. That was all I had left of my life. I didn't cry while packing. The tears came later, when I stood outside the building in the cold, the wind cutting through my coat, and I realized I had nowhere to turn. Amanda didn't come out to say goodbye. Chad didn't even pretend to care. I sat on the curb for an hour, my phone battery dead, my spirit drained. I remember thinking, so this is what it feels like to be erased. That night, I checked into a motel, the kind where the wallpaper is peeling and the vending machine always eats your coins. I lay there staring at the ceiling, wondering how everything could have fallen apart so completely, wondering what I had done to deserve being cast aside. The next morning, I sent Amanda a message. "I understand. I'll always love you." She never replied. I tried again a week later and again after that. I messaged on birthdays, sent little updates. Nothing. 3 months passed, and each day felt longer than the one before. I applied everywhere I could think of, any kind of job. But no one wanted to hire a grieving widow in her late 50s with no recent work experience. I considered house cleaning, babysitting, whatever I could manage. But my body just didn't move the way it used to. And more than the loneliness, it was the shame that weighed heaviest. I had poured my whole life into that girl. How could she turn her back so easily? One night, while digging through a box of old keepsakes just to feel connected to something familiar, I found it. My mother's diary. I hadn't looked at it in years, maybe ever. But something about that moment made me reach for it. Sitting on the edge of the motel bed, I opened the worn pages. And that's when I saw it. A name. A hidden truth. A secret that would change everything. I remember it vividly. My hands trembling, heart pounding. Because in that instant, I stopped being just the mother who was cast aside. I became someone entirely different. And for the first time in months, I felt something close to hope. They thought they'd taken everything from me, but they had no idea what was still waiting beneath the surface. From that point on, the days blended together like watercolors bleeding across a damp page. The motel smelled like stale air and faded cigarette smoke. The soft mechanical hum of the vending machine outside my door became an odd sort of lullaby, one that sang of resignation. I barely made a sound. I didn't cry every night, but when the tears came, they were silent. The kind of crying that shakes your whole body, even though you don't make a sound, because no one's there to hold you. On the fourth day, I sent Amanda another message. Just a simple line. I'm okay. Just wanted to see how you're doing. Nothing came back. 2 weeks later, I tried again. Just a single heart emoji. Still silence. I kept telling myself she was just overwhelmed, that she'd come back around eventually. Maybe Chad was feeding her lies. But as more time passed, that fragile hope inside me began to rot. My savings were drying up. I tried getting part-time work, at grocery stores, front desks, even a diner off the highway. But I was always either too qualified or not the right fit. I knew what those words really meant. Too old. Too worn down. Then one night, I sat cross-legged on the motel floor, going through the only box I'd brought with me that wasn't filled with clothes. A small collection of memories from the old house. Some photos. A few letters. And, tucked beneath it all, a small leather-bound book. My mother's diary. I hadn't even realized I'd packed it. I almost set it aside, but the feel of the worn leather against my hands made me pause. I turned on the lamp next to the bed and opened it to the first page. Her handwriting hadn't changed since the notes she used to sneak into my lunchbox. Careful, elegant loops written in blue ink. At first, it was nothing unusual. Notes about the weather, church events, complaints about prices at the store. Then I came across an entry dated June. He came again today, said he wished things were different, that he wished I could be his wife. But he has a family, a name, a reputation. Margaret can never know. She must never find out. I just pray she understands someday how much I truly loved her. My heart stopped. Everything I thought I knew about my past tilted in that moment. That single entry rewrote my entire world. Even if I was the result of a fleeting moment, a mistake driven by longing and impulse, I read those words over and over. She must never know. The sentence clung to me like a fog. I kept turning the pages, uncovering entry after entry. Subtle clues, fragmented memories, meetings in anonymous hotel rooms, envelopes of cash my mother hesitated to take but ultimately needed. She never wrote out his name, only his initials. HJS. And then came the entry dated February. He said he's made arrangements, that if something ever happened to him, he wanted to make sure Margaret received something, a piece of what he built. It won't be public. It's too risky. But he promised me there's a trust, a letter. His lawyer, Mr. Goldstein, would know the name. The name struck me like a blow. Goldstein. I had seen it before, though I couldn't place it right away. It took me 2 days and hours on the motel's shared computer to finally track him down. Leonard Goldstein, retired estate attorney, still connected to a private law firm based in Dallas. I didn't call. My hands wouldn't stop shaking long enough to even try. So instead, I did something I hadn't done in years. I wrote a letter, a real one, pen on paper. I explained who I was, who my mother had been, and gently asked, pleaded, for a chance to speak with him. 2 weeks passed, and then the phone rang. I still remember his voice, how it cracked slightly when I said my mother's name. He knew her, not just professionally, personally. "I always wondered if you'd find me," he said. "There's something here you need to see." The very next morning, I boarded a Greyhound bound for Dallas. I packed lightly, only half convinced this wasn't some elaborate misunderstanding, or worse, a scam. But the moment I stepped into that quiet office, lined with aged books and the kind of stillness that only comes with time, I knew it was real. He handed me an envelope, yellowed with age, sealed, delicate. It was addressed to my daughter Margaret Louise and signed by Harold James Sterling, founder of Sterling Energy, one of the most influential oil tycoons in Central Texas. I had seen his face in news articles and magazine covers growing up. A man with a reputation, a family, a carefully curated legacy. I couldn't get past the second paragraph before tears clouded my eyes. He admitted it all: the affair, the guilt, the hidden affection, and most of all, the promise. In the event of my passing, I have arranged for a portion of my personal assets, kept separate from my public estate, to be delivered to you through Mr. Goldstein. You are my daughter. Though I was too much of a coward to acknowledge you in life, I do so now in death. Mr. Goldstein slid a folder across the desk. Inside were documents, bank accounts, investment records, ownership papers. The total value, a little over $1 million. I stared down at the papers, then up at him. "Is this real?" I asked. He nodded. "It's always been yours." My heart didn't race because of the money. It beat louder because for the first time in my life, I felt seen, recognized, chosen. I didn't shout, didn't collapse in tears. I simply sat there in silence, letting the truth fall over me like a long-awaited storm, washing away everything I thought I knew. That night, back at the motel, I didn't sleep. I just lay there, eyes open, staring at the same ceiling I'd stared at for months. But this time, a smile formed. They thought they had thrown me away, that I had nothing left. But they were wrong. I wasn't broken. I was just beginning. I didn't return to Austin immediately. Something inside me had shifted forever. I wasn't just Margaret anymore, the discarded mother, the grieving widow. I was someone new, someone who had lived in the shadows of lies and finally stepped into the light. For the first time in what felt like years, I didn't feel crushed by shame. I breathed in something purer, clarity, strength. I spent a few more days in Dallas, wandering through neighborhoods, sipping coffee in parks, watching the world carry on around me. I didn't feel bitterness toward those passing strangers anymore. I didn't envy them. I watched closely instead, wondering who among them wore smiles to hide their pain, who had felt betrayal, who had fought their way back from invisibility. Leonard Goldstein didn't just hand me an inheritance that day. He gave me something far more valuable. He gave me time. I needed time to process everything, to truly grasp what I now held in my hands. It wasn't just money, it was power. And honestly, I had no clue what to do with it at first. But grief has a strange way of fueling you once you've been humiliated enough. When I came back to Austin, I didn't return to the motel. Instead, I rented a short-term place downtown, just off South Congress. It was clean, modern, and quiet. The kind of spot Amanda and Chad would never expect me to afford. I started dressing differently, more polished, more intentional. Not flashy, just a new kind of invisible. The kind of invisible that lets you walk through doors unnoticed but unblocked. I spent hours watching YouTube videos about investing, real estate, contracts. I taught myself the language of business, not to build some empire, but to protect myself. I vowed never to feel powerless again. That's when I found it. Buried deep on a real estate auction site, there was a unit in an apartment building in East Austin, slightly run down but solid. The same complex where Amanda and Chad lived. My heart pounded as I stared at the listing. The property was labeled distressed because the owner was behind on taxes, and the auction was scheduled in 2 weeks. Without hesitation, and with Mr. Goldstein's guidance, I set up an LLC, an anonymous shell company. I filed the paperwork, moved the funds, and placed my bid. I wasn't after revenge, exactly, but I was ready to take back control of the one place they thought they ruled. The auction came and went. Quietly, legally, and completely under the radar, I won. Just like that, I owned the building where they lived. The place they'd kicked me out of with only 2 suitcases and some hollow excuse, where they stripped me of dignity at my lowest point. Sitting at my desk, holding the deed, I whispered, "Let's see how Chad likes paying rent to someone he refused to feed." A month later, letters went out to every tenant. Rent was being reassessed, lease terms reviewed. For Chad and Amanda, the new rent wasn't just doubled. It was tripled. Market rate plus back fees. I never needed to see Chad's reaction to know he'd lost it. I could feel his fury from miles away. But it wasn't just about the money. It was about pride. Chad had to feel in control, and I'd just pulled the rug out from under him without a sound. 2 days after the notices were sent, Amanda called for the first time since I'd left. I let it go to voicemail. "Mom, I don't know if you heard, but something weird's happening. Our rent just shot way up. Chad's losing it. I don't know. Can we talk?" I didn't reply. This wasn't about revenge. It was about consequences. They needed to understand the weight of their choices. One night, I drove by the building. Their lights were on. I saw shadows behind the curtains. Amanda pacing, Chad yelling, his silhouette unmistakable. I watched for a moment and then drove away. A part of me felt empty. Another part vindicated, and yet another part ached deeply. Even now, with all that I understood and held inside, I would have given anything to be welcomed back. Not into the apartment, but into my daughter's heart. But I knew that wasn't something that could happen, at least not yet. So I stayed quiet and waited. Because sometimes the strongest form of justice is silence. I wasn't finished. I didn't fully grasp how much I had changed until I spotted Amanda at the grocery store 3 weeks after the rent went up. She didn't notice me. I was 2 aisles away, concealed behind a rack of discounted cereal. She looked exhausted, not just tired, but worn out. Her hair was pulled back messily, the same way she used to when she'd been crying. Her cart was half empty, filled mostly with cheap essentials like rice, eggs, and a few generic canned goods. I should have turned and left, but I didn't. I followed her quietly, my heart racing as if I were doing something wrong. She stopped by a small box of mac and cheese, then glanced at her phone. Maybe a message from Chad. Her shoulders slumped. She put the box back. That moment shattered me. Not because I pitied her, but because I remembered the little girl who used to come running to me with scraped knees, the one who begged me every night to check for monsters under her bed. And now, she was living with one. That day, I drove home and sat silently on the couch for hours, staring out the window, thinking about how life had turned us into strangers. But I reminded myself that this wasn't punishment. It was consequence. And the consequence was long overdue. I had a plan now, not just for the building, but for a slow, deliberate game of chess. Every move was measured, every step intentional. With the LLC fully established and the property legally transferred, I began repairs, small ones at first, fixing leaks, broken locks, flickering lights. Chad never noticed. He was too busy furious about the rent hike, yelling at the property manager through emails, demanding explanations. But I knew him, how his ego worked. He wasn't going anywhere. He'd see moving as admitting defeat, and Amanda would follow his lead, as she always had. So I kept going. I changed the property signage, installed a security camera near the lobby, updated the tenants' mailboxes, all under my company's name, ML Holdings, short for Margaret Louise. No one knew who was behind it. Then came the mandatory annual inspection notices. Chad sent an angry response through the tenant portal, full of empty threats and self-righteous outrage. I smiled, reading it. He was unraveling, and I didn't have to do a thing. Meanwhile, I was becoming someone I hardly recognized. I wore my hair differently now, dressed sharper, walked with intention. I started attending small business meetups under a fake name, learning the ins and outs of real estate and building new connections. No one asked about my past. They only saw a calm, composed woman with sharp eyes and cash ready to invest. The most effective disguise is the truth you choose not to reveal. One morning, as I left a tenant meeting, I passed Amanda and Chad in the parking lot. I kept my sunglasses on, my hair pulled back into a sleek bun, and carried some documents in my hand. Amanda barely gave me a glance. Chad didn't recognize me at all. That night, sitting in my living room with a cup of tea, I thought about how strange it was to walk right past your own child and feel invisible. Not because you're weak, but because you're stronger than they remember. They couldn't see me now because they only knew the version of me they once controlled. That woman was gone. Amanda's calls kept coming. Soft, hesitant voicemails. "Hi, Mom. Just wanted to see if maybe you had time to talk. I know things have been complicated." I didn't return them, not out of cruelty, but because I needed her to feel the emptiness she caused. Whenever doubt started to creep in, I opened my mother's diary and read those words over and over. Margaret will never know. She must never know. But I did know now, and with that knowledge came a kind of armor no one could break through. I was no longer the woman begging to stay under their roof. I was the woman who owned it. I always believed revenge wasn't about retaliation. It was about restoring balance, justice without rage. A correction, not a battle. But when I read Chad's email in response to the rent increase notice, I'll admit a small spark of satisfaction ignited inside me. Subject: rent increase. This is absolutely unacceptable. This must be a mistake. Tripling our rent is extortion. I demand to speak to whoever owns this dump. We've lived here for 3 years and never been late once. This is robbery. He signed it, Chad D. Harmon, as if his name carried weight. I read the email 3 times before forwarding it to my property manager with a brief note. Please respond using Standard Clause C regarding market rate adjustments. No special exceptions. Chad wasn't just angry. He was shocked. His ego never allowed room for the idea that someone could outsmart him. He was so used to being in control that the thought of answering to a faceless landlord drove him mad. Amanda tried calling me again that night. The voicemail was different. No hesitation. Mom, I know you're not answering, but I really need to talk. Things are rough right now. Chad's upset and taking it out on everything. We're trying to figure things out. I miss you. I do. Her voice cracked at the end. For a moment, my fingers hovered over the screen. I could call her back, tell her it would be okay, that I'd fix everything, but I didn't. Because it wasn't okay, and I couldn't keep cleaning up the messes she helped make. Amanda had let him push me out like I was nothing more than a bill they couldn't afford. Now that the pressure was on her, she remembered how to reach me. No, let her sit with the silence a little longer. The following week, I approved more upgrades to the property. Fresh exterior paint, new hallway lighting, landscaping improvements. Chad's rent hike wasn't just punishment, it was funding better living conditions for the other tenants. That was the irony. Everyone else gained, but he couldn't see it. He started slipping angry notes under the office door. The water pressure sucks. Trash is piling up. If this is what we're paying for, it's a joke. Every note was ignored. Amanda stopped leaving messages and switched to texting, short ones. Hey, can we talk? I really need you. Then silence again. Meanwhile, I watched the bank statements come in. ML Holdings was steady, even profitable. The other tenants were quiet, respectful, and paid their rent on time. Only Chad was making noise, while Amanda was caught in the middle of a storm. Everything shifted when I got the quarterly report from the building manager. Attached were photos of Chad and Amanda's unit, the bathroom covered in mildew, cracked kitchen tiles, mail piled on the floor. They were cutting corners, living on the edge. I should have felt sorry for them. Instead, I felt clarity. This was no longer just about rent. It was about control. And Chad was losing his grip fast. Rumors spread through the building that Chad had started working extra hours. One tenant saw Amanda crying on the back steps one afternoon. They were falling apart from the inside out, and I didn't need to say a word. That was the part I kept returning to. For so long, I had been the one begging to be heard, pleading with Amanda to recognize what Chad really was and what she was becoming by standing beside him. Now they were drowning in their silence, and I was watching from above, literally. My new apartment overlooked their courtyard. It was a different building, higher floor, safer neighborhood, with a view they could never afford. I didn't watch them constantly, just enough to remind myself that I wasn't crazy, that the betrayal was real, and what they did to me deserved consequences. Yet despite all that, some nights I found myself sitting by the window, holding my phone, staring at Amanda's last message. I really need you. The woman inside me, the mother aching, felt it deeply. But the woman I had become knew this was only the beginning. I used to think heartbreak happened in loud moments, slamming doors, shouted words, public fights. But real heartbreak is quiet. It comes in the form of a voicemail left unanswered, a message left unread, the silence between you and someone who once called you mommy. Amanda's calls stopped. The texts slowed. But the damage on her side only grew worse. From what I gathered through the building staff, tension in their apartment had turned into open hostility. Chad snapped at everyone, refused maintenance requests, and demanded unnecessary inspections, searching for someone to blame. Amanda looked exhausted, like she hadn't slept in days. I didn't feel satisfaction or joy. This wasn't about watching them suffer. It was something far more painful. Watching the daughter I raised willingly stay trapped and call it love. One afternoon, my property manager sent me a report after a noise complaint. The neighbor downstairs had overheard a heated argument, shouts about losing control and blaming Amanda. Chad had stormed out and didn't return until the next morning. Amanda stayed inside the whole night, lights off, curtains drawn. I waited, not for Chad, but for her. It took 2 more days, long and painful days. Then, just as the sun was setting behind the trees one evening, the building intercom buzzed. Amanda Harmon's voice trembled as she asked if Margaret, her mother, still lived here. My heart stopped. I froze, staring at the screen without answering. Slowly, I pressed the button to unlock the door. 10 minutes later, a gentle knock came at my apartment door. When I opened it, she was standing there, a faint shadow of the woman I had once known. Pale, makeup smeared, her shirt wrinkled, she looked decades older than her age. We gazed at each other in silence for what felt like forever. At last, she exhaled softly. "Hi, Mom." I stepped aside, letting her enter hesitantly, as if unsure she was welcome. The room was still, except for the soft clinking of teacups, as I made 2 mugs of tea. I didn't ask why she was there or how she was doing. I simply handed her the tea, sat down across from her, and waited. "I don't even know where to begin," she murmured quietly. "I didn't say anything," she added, looking down. "Chad's not easy. He's angry all the time. He blames the rent, he blames me, he even blames the neighbor's dog." I remained silent, thinking I was doing the right thing. Back then, when we asked you to leave, though it felt like I had no choice, I just wanted peace. "I didn't want more conflict," Chad said. She paused. "He told me you wouldn't leave unless we pushed you. And God, I hate myself for agreeing." I sipped my tea. "I miss you," she whispered, "but I don't know how to fix this." I looked at her face, every wrinkle, every flicker of emotion. She wanted forgiveness, but was afraid to ask. So I gave her what I could. Silence. Because sometimes silence feels safer than facing the truth. We sat like that for nearly an hour. She never asked for money or help. She just needed to be close, and I let her. When she finally stood to leave, she reached out and took my hand. "I'm sorry," she said softly, "for everything." I didn't respond, but I held her hand a little longer than she expected. She pulled away first, tears filling her eyes, then walked out. I didn't cry, but the moment the door clicked shut, I sank into my chair, holding the warm teacup in my hands like it was a lifeline. She had come. She had looked me in the eye. Now I knew the cracks were finally showing. True power doesn't shout or slam doors. It doesn't threaten. Instead, it quietly pulls strings, closes doors, and watches those who underestimated it begin to squirm. Chad was squirming. After Amanda's visit, things grew darker in that apartment. I didn't need a camera to sense it. You can feel a home falling apart if you listen closely enough. The maintenance staff said Chad had become unhinged, storming into the management office twice a week, demanding to know who owned the building. He wanted names, faces, someone to blame. The fact that he couldn't find one sent him spiraling, and he began digging deeper. I knew he wouldn't give up easily. Chad was never one to accept defeat quietly. I'd witnessed how he'd go through Amanda's phone whenever she lingered too long at the store, how he scrutinized her receipts and criticized the time she took running errands. Possessive didn't even begin to describe it. So, when he started digging for the identity behind ML Holdings, I was prepared. He began by trying to research the LLC filing, but my lawyer had set everything up through a privacy trust. No names, no leads. Then came the desperate, clumsy emails to my property manager, pretending to be a tenant, asking who owned the building. He even called the title office, posing as a lawyer from another property. The clerk caught on and reported it straight to us. When those attempts failed, he turned his anger inward. Amanda, I'm not sure exactly what happened, but a neighbor contacted management, asking if someone could check on the Harmons. She'd heard breaking glass, raised voices, anger that stemmed from more than just bills, something born of fear. Maintenance went up, but no one answered. Through the door they could hear Chad pacing and muttering, Amanda crying. The silence that followed was heavier than the shouting. A few days later, I received an unusual envelope. No name, no return address. Inside was a note. I know what you're doing. You think you're clever, but you don't scare me. I'll find out who you are, and when I do, you'll regret it. No signature, but I recognize the handwriting. Chad wrote just like he spoke, angry, uneven, pressing hard on the paper. Holding that letter, my heart pounded, not from fear, but from memory. It took me back to the moment he stood in that kitchen, looking at me like I was beneath him. The way Amanda stood silently beside him, not just quiet, but complicit. And now, he was the one grasping at shadows, suffocating on doubt, screaming into emptiness. It was poetic, but dangerous. So I stepped up. I had my lawyer get in touch with building security. We installed extra surveillance, discreet, legal, routine. I made sure the other tenants were protected. This building wasn't going to crumble because one man couldn't bear the weight of his own cruelty. Amanda never called again, but I heard from the manager that she'd been walking to work. Their car was gone, utilities reduced, lights off by evening, no heat some nights. The fractures weren't only in their relationship, they were in their very survival. And still, I kept my distance. This wasn't about revenge. It was about resolution. Watching Chad's world shrink until he saw how small he truly was, and letting Amanda choose whether to remain trapped or take the key I'd quietly placed before her. I knew she wasn't ready yet, but the walls were closing in, and secrets tend to slip through even the smallest cracks. I wasn't expecting the knock on my door that night. It had been quiet for days. No emails from management, no voicemails from Amanda, no more anonymous threats. Just a silence that felt like a storm lurking somewhere nearby, waiting to break. When the knock came, soft and slow, something tightened in my chest. I opened the door, and there she was, Amanda, drenched from the rain, clutching a grocery bag to her chest as if it was the only thing keeping her steady. Her eyes were red, her mouth parted, but no words came out. It looked like she'd run out of words days ago. I stepped aside, and she walked in slowly, water dripping onto the hardwood floor. I handed her a towel, and without speaking, we moved through the apartment. I heated the kettle and poured 2 cups of chamomile tea. She sat on the edge of the couch, like she didn't want to stay long, or perhaps didn't feel she deserved to. She stared blankly into her cup before finally saying, "He's not who I thought he was." I remained silent. Part of me had always known, but I'd convinced myself it was just stress, that he needed support, and if I was patient, he'd change. Still, I said nothing. Her voice trembled as she continued. "He thinks someone is targeting us. He's obsessed. He's been going through my phone, my emails. Last week he followed me to work, said he was making sure I wasn't involved." A shiver ran through her, not from the cold. "He asked if I was hiding something, if you were hiding something." That took my breath away. She didn't wait for me to respond. "I told him I hadn't spoken to you in weeks, that I didn't even know where you were." She paused and then met my eyes. "But that was a lie. I found your building listed in a security notice. Same management company. I figured it out. It wasn't hard." Amanda had always been smart, but being smart doesn't always mean being brave. Now, she looked like someone who had finally opened her eyes and hated what she saw. "I didn't speak," she admitted. "Not yet." "I miss you," she whispered, "but I don't even know how to be around you anymore." My hand tightened around the mug. "You left," she said, her voice breaking, "and I let you. I let him push you out." Finally, I spoke. "No, Amanda, you didn't let him. You stood with him." That stopped her cold. She blinked, her lips parting, as if to deny or defend herself. But there was nothing left to defend. I stood and walked to the window, gazing out into the night. "I begged for your voice that night," I said quietly. "Just one word, just one. And you stayed silent." Behind me, I heard her breathe out, a soft, broken sound. "I didn't think it would get this bad," she said. "I thought I could manage him." "You can't manage a man like that," I replied gently. "You survive him or you leave him." She said nothing more. There was no need. We sat in silence, two women bound by blood but lacking trust. Not yet. Maybe never. When she finally stood to leave, she placed the mug down carefully, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said. "I just needed to remember what it felt like to be safe." I walked her to the door. She hesitated, then suddenly turned and wrapped her arms around me. At first, I didn't return the hug. Then I did. Gently, cautiously, like someone trying to hold on to a memory without letting it slip away. When she pulled back, she didn't say goodbye. She just looked at me one last time and left. As the door closed behind her, something shifted deep inside me. Not forgiveness, not yet, but a faint spark of something that might someday grow into it, if she chose to let it. The invitation arrived on a quiet Tuesday morning, professional, low-key, without any fuss. It was an attendance meeting to discuss upcoming building renovations, scheduled for the common room the following week. Attendance was mandatory, and questions were encouraged. I knew Chad would show up. He couldn't resist. He wanted a name, a face, someone to blame. What he didn't realize was that he'd be walking right into the presence of the woman he had discarded like a broken appliance. On the day of the meeting, I arrived early. I wore a charcoal gray blazer paired with dark jeans, simple, elegant, unrecognizable. My hair, now styled in soft waves, rested on my shoulders. I looked nothing like the woman who once pleaded quietly for dignity at Amanda's kitchen table. The common room slowly filled. Tenants trickled in, some curious, others annoyed, most indifferent. Then Chad appeared, striding in with the swagger of a man ready for confrontation. Amanda followed behind him like a shadow. He didn't glance around or notice me, his eyes locked on the property manager at the front. "Where is she?" he demanded. "I want to speak to the person in charge today." The manager stayed composed. All questions will be addressed during the presentation. Chad scoffed. Amanda looked down at her shoes. I sat near the back, quiet. The presentation began. Routine announcements about upgrades, timelines, a new security system, landscaping improvements, better insulation. All practical, smart changes, funded partly by the very rent Chad had bitterly opposed. Then the manager paused. We'd like to thank ML Holdings for their commitment to revitalizing the property and prioritizing tenant comfort. The owner is here today. Should anyone have questions? I stood up. The room turned to look at me. I walked calmly to the front, steady with each step, a quiet drumbeat in my chest. Chad's face twisted from confusion to disbelief. Amanda's mouth opened in shock. I faced the room. Good evening, I said. My name is Margaret. I'm the owner of this building. The silence was complete. Chad sprang to his feet so quickly his chair scraped the floor. You? This is a joke. What kind of game is this? I looked directly at him. Really looked. Saw the cracks he tried to hide, the sweat at his collar, the bags under his eyes, the panic. No game, I said softly. Just business. He stepped forward. You manipulated this. You've been behind everything the whole time. You raised our rent. You're trying to ruin us. I held my ground. I gave you a roof. I made improvements. I treated every tenant equally. What I didn't do was forget. He opened his mouth to respond, but I turned back to the group. If anyone has questions about the changes or improvements, I'm happy to answer them after the meeting. Thank you. I stepped aside. The meeting resumed, but the tension lingered in the air. Chad didn't sit. He stood trembling, furious. Amanda sat with her hands tightly clasped, eyes wide and glossy. When the meeting ended, tenants approached me, shaking hands, asking questions, thanking me. Some had suspected. Most had no clue. Chad waited until the room cleared, then strode toward me. You think you've won? He hissed. This is nothing. You've made an enemy. I met his gaze steadily. No, Chad. I didn't make anything. You did. The day you looked me in the eye and treated me like I didn't matter. Amanda stepped between us. Chad, stop. He turned to her, shocked. What did you just... I said stop, she repeated, louder this time. She was never your enemy. She never has been. You were. He stared at her as if she had struck him. And in a way, she had. Amanda turned to me, her voice shaky. I had no idea. I swear, about the building, the money, any of it. I nodded. I know. Why didn't you tell me? Because you needed to see it for yourself, not just hear about it. She blinked back tears. Chad scoffed and took a step back. You two deserve each other. No, I said softly. She deserves better. Then I turned and walked away. For the first time since that terrible night in their kitchen, I felt something change inside me. Not revenge, not satisfaction, but power. Quiet, steady, and completely mine. 4 days later, Amanda appeared at my door again. This time she held something in her hands that made my knees weaken the moment I saw it. A book. Faded leather, torn corner, spine barely intact. My mother's diary. I opened the door without a word. She stepped inside, eyes wide, breath uneven. I found it in my closet, she said. The last time I visited, you must have left it behind. She placed it on the coffee table as if it were sacred, and to me, it was. I read through it. My heart stopped. I wasn't trying to pry, she hurried to explain, but I recognized her handwriting. I was just searching for something that made sense. Silence settled over us, heavy and still. I didn't know about Harold Sterling. she whispered. Or the money, or the trust, or any of it. I nodded slowly once. I didn't know either, not until I had nothing left to lose. Her voice cracked. Mom, why didn't you tell me? Why did you let me believe you were helpless? I met her gaze, and for once, she didn't look away. Because I was helpless. The night you shut the door on me, I had no plan, no money, not even a place to cry without someone knocking, telling me to be quiet. Amanda flinched. I found the diary at my lowest point, when I was counting coins to buy dinner, when I hadn't spoken to anyone in a week. That diary didn't just remind me who I was. It reminded me that I mattered, that my mother didn't just love me. She fought for me silently, even though she never got to show it. Amanda sat down, hands clenched in her lap. I don't know how I became the kind of daughter who could do what I did. I keep asking myself that over and over. I walked to the window and stared down at the street, the quiet rhythm of life going on below. You didn't become her all at once, I said. It was small decisions, letting things slide, choosing peace over truth, believing love meant loyalty even when it hurt. She stood and moved toward me. I've left him. The words dropped like a bomb. He tried to go through my things again, my laptop, my bag. I said no. That was it. He screamed, packed a bag, and left. Said he'd be back. I changed the locks the next day. I looked at her, stunned. I don't know who I am without him, she admitted, voice shaking. But I'd rather find out than keep disappearing. A heavy silence passed between us, filled with everything we hadn't said. Then she looked down at the diary. You didn't deserve what I did. What we did. I can't fix that, but I want to try. I moved closer and sat beside her. I used to dream about hearing those words, I said. But now that you say them, they don't change the past. They rewrite it. She looked at me, confused. I gently held her hand. You see me now. That changed everything. We sat together for a long while, wrapped in a silence that didn't wound but healed, the kind that comes only after the truth has been fully spoken. Before Amanda left that night, she hesitated at the door. You never raised me to be weak, she said. I just forgot how strong you were. I smiled gently. No, I told her. You didn't forget. You just stopped looking. And now she was seeing it all. Not just who I had become, but who I had always been. When the email from Chad arrived, I almost didn't open it. The subject alone made my stomach turn. We need to talk now. I read it carefully, his words sharp, frantic, soaked in desperation. I know everything about the building, the inheritance, and your little secret with Sterling. You think you're clever? You think you can ruin my life and walk away smiling? Let me be clear. If you don't undo this, I will go to the press. Your name, your mother's affair, everything. Let's see how your precious reputation holds up when everyone knows what kind of family you really come from. I stared at the screen, stunned. He had finally put the pieces together. Somehow, through Amanda or his own investigation, he had uncovered the truth. But I wasn't afraid. I had prepared for this moment from the day I bought the building. I forwarded the email to my attorney. By the next morning, Chad received a cease and desist letter. It included records of every threatening message he'd sent to the property office, the forged documents he tried to submit under a fake law firm, and the altered emails we had traced back to his IP address. There were tenant complaints, logs of maintenance sabotage, and even audio clips of his angry outbursts recorded in public areas around the building. We didn't need criminal charges. One defamation and harassment lawsuit was enough. He panicked, and I knew because Amanda called me 2 days later. He's gone, she said, voice trembling. Packed up while I was at work. Left a note saying he was being hunted. Said you ruined his life. He ruined his own, I replied quietly. Amanda was silent for a moment. Then she said, I'm sorry for always thinking he deserved my silence. You were scared, I said. I've been there. Fear makes you small, but you don't have to stay that way. It wasn't long before Chad tried to strike back, posting vague rants on social media, hints of corruption, betrayal. But he never named names. He couldn't afford to, especially after my attorney's second letter warning of legal action for every word he published. After that, he went quiet, at least publicly. Privately, I knew he would never forget the day he realized the woman he'd kicked out with just 2 suitcases and a weary face now owned the roof over his head, the lease in her name, and the keys to every door he once slammed in my face. Amanda, meanwhile, was changing. Within a month, she moved out of the unit, found a small studio near work, started therapy, and joined a community art class. She even painted something for me, an abstract phoenix in deep reds and golds that now hangs above my fireplace. We talk more often now, not every day, but when we do, it's real and honest. No more pretending. The last piece of the puzzle arrived in an envelope, a letter from Mr. Goldstein. Congratulations, Margaret. The building has officially been transferred. The final tenants have signed new leases. The lawsuit against Mr. Harmon has been resolved in your favor. You are now free to sell, hold, or restructure as you choose. I folded the letter carefully and held it close to my chest. This was never just about money or property or revenge. It was about truth, about reclaiming my name, my story, and my strength. The next morning, I called a realtor. I was ready to close the final chapter and open the door to a life I no longer needed to just survive. I could finally live life on my own terms. I sold the building late in the spring. The final paperwork was signed on a bright, clear Tuesday. No fanfare, no ceremony, just the quiet sound of a pen clicking, a firm handshake, and the heavy burden of 3 years of grief, betrayal, and silence lifting from my shoulders. The money was transferred to my account the next day, but I didn't celebrate. Instead, I wrote a large check. Half of the proceeds went to a local shelter for women and children in crisis, the kind of place I wish I had known about. That night I stood on the curb with 2 suitcases and no one to call. I asked them to create a wing named after my mother, the Elilaner House. It was my way of honoring the woman who gave me silent strength, who hid a lifetime of secrets so I could one day uncover the truth and become more than what the world expected. I used the other half to buy a small house. It wasn't extravagant, just a charming 2-bedroom on the same street where I grew up in Cedar Park. Oak trees stood tall out front. A porch swing hung gently, and there was enough room for quiet, healing, and maybe even growing tomatoes if I ever felt like it. On the day I moved in, Amanda helped carry boxes. Neither of us said much, but after we finished unpacking, she sat beside me on the porch swing, legs tucked under her, eyes scanning the street like she was trying to recognize the girl she once was. I remember riding my bike here, she said softly, before everything got complicated. I nodded. You were always safe here, I told her. I forgot how that felt, she whispered. We didn't talk about Chad. We didn't have to. His chapter had ended quietly, without drama, just silence. He vanished into a new city, a new job, probably a new lie, but not before signing a non-disclosure agreement and dropping his threats quietly. The last thing he wanted was another legal battle, or worse, the world learning the truth about him. He became a ghost. Amanda stayed for dinner. We made grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup, just like when she was little. She laughed when she burned one side. I laughed when she blamed the pan. It was the first genuine laughter we'd shared in years. After she left that night, I stood at the window holding a cup of tea with both hands, watching the moonlight stretch across the front lawn. For the first time in a very long time, I spoke the words aloud. I forgive you. Not to Amanda, but to myself. Because that was the hardest part. Not rising from the ashes, but realizing I was never the fire they tried to put out. I was the spark they never saw coming. They taught me silence was weakness. I learned how to turn it into my weapon. They tried to erase me. Instead, I became someone they could never forget. I sat on the couch, opened the diary one last time, and slipped a note inside for Amanda to find someday. You don't need their love to be worthy. You don't need their approval to be strong. You only need the truth, and to never forget who you are. The clock ticked softly in the background. My tea grew cold in my hands, but my heart was finally warm. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to win. I just needed to be who I was all along. And now, at last, I was home.